And then there were four. In March Madness, we have four remaining teams for an epic slate of games next weekend. And before we get into breaking down all the action around March Madness, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, check out our Instagram and TikTok pages. And for my Spotify listeners, please give us a 5-star review on Spotify, and all links are in the description. Florida Atlantic are the tournament darlings, and they are now bound to the Final Four. They picked up a great win, a gutsy win over Kansas State, and both teams honestly played with everything they had. Major credit to Kansas State for getting all the way down here. Marquise Noel, you have to know the name of this guy. He had a phenomenal performance in the Sweet 16, set an NCAA record for 19 assists in the tournament game, and got his team past Michigan State, who I thought were dark horses to get out of that bracket to the Final Four. But they came up a little bit short with some late game execution. Florida Atlantic was really good in their defensive sets, executing free throws, and they played great defense. When the game was tight in the last few seconds, we had a chance for Kansas State to send the game into overtime. Marquise Noel was dribbling up the court, had a chance maybe to pull it back or get a better play, but decided to dish it off a little bit too early, and they couldn't get a final shot off. FAU goes to the Final Four, and major credit to this program. I mean, they started off with a really small budget at I think about $1 million, and just from the reward money that they're getting from this Final Four appearance, they're getting $6 million. That is a major credit to one of these smaller schools, and we'll touch base on that in a little bit later in this podcast. They'll be facing San Diego State, and again, these are two teams with them and Creighton facing head-to-head for a spot in the Final Four. And this game was also very competitive, a very physical battle, a low-scoring affair, 57-56 with San Diego State. The Aztecs are moving on to the Final Four. The game was marred by some controversy. As I said earlier, this was a very physical game, and when you're playing like that, referees has to be consistent. I've been hard on referees on this podcast, and I just really want to talk about consistency. When you're judging the physicality of a basketball game, it has to remain consistent throughout the game. Doesn't mean that later in the last few seconds of the game you can call a ticky-tack foul. I don't know if this was necessarily ticky-tack. Yeah, there was some contact. The defender had a hand on the shooter's hip, but I've seen a lot harder calls get waved off before, and that wasn't consistent with what the calls were going on for majority of this game. For the refs to ruin a really nice game like this, they deserve to go into overtime tied and have 5 more minutes to play it out. This is the case where referees need to stay out of it. You can't let the referees decide something. I would understand it was a blatant call, but like I said again, consistency, and that's really where it comes down to. But Creighton handled it with class. I mean, their coach, McDermott, said that they didn't play well enough and they let the game get into the referee's hands. That is true, absolutely. As a fan, I think, once again, you have to talk about how the refs need to stay out of it and let the players decide how the game truly ends. I was really disappointed that I didn't have the guts to pick the Aztecs to go further along in this tournament. I got a scoop from somebody on ESPN, I can't remember who, but they were really high on the Aztecs coming into this March Madness tournament. But the problem was I would have picked them, or I had more confidence in picking them at least, if they weren't facing a team like Alabama. Alabama was the number 1 overall seed. They dominated the SEC, who's become a marquee conference in college hoops. They handled business against Alabama. They won, I wouldn't say comfortably, but they won with some room to spare. And major credit to the Aztecs for coming this far and making their first ever Final Four appearance. They're going to end up playing FAU, and that's going to be a really tantalizing matchup with 2 of the Cinderellas facing off head-to-head for the right to go to the national championship game. On the other side of the bracket, UConn has looked like a juggernaut. I talked about Texas being a juggernaut early on in the first and second rounds, but the true juggernaut has been UConn. They've been dominant, and facing up against the Zags, who are a veteran team led by Drew Timme, one of the best players of all time from college basketball, they were primed to make another Final Four appearance, but the Huskies had other ideas. They beat the brakes off of Gonzaga, especially in the second half, leading by as many as 30 points in this game. They won by 28 in the final score, and the UConn Huskies, I mean, this team hasn't really had a lot to hang their hat on for the last 9 years. And we remember after 2014, they were national champions led by Shabazz Napier. You remember that guy. He was a superstar for that UConn team. And it seems that history is sort of repeating itself in 2023. I'm really going to be interested to see how they match up with the Hurricanes of Miami. I mean, Miami has also played really well. They upset a 1 seed along their way to making it to the Final Four. They beat the Cougars out of Houston, and then they beat Texas to make it to the Final Four. Really ironic that they beat 2 Texas teams to make it to Texas. But major credit to Miami. I mean, they are a really nice team. They play hard, they're physical, they're great at rebounding in particular. I think this is a strength for strength matchup between UConn and Miami. We haven't had a tournament where no number 1 seed has failed to make the Elite 8 until this year. All 4 1 seeds were knocked out by the Sweet 16, with 2 being knocked out in the first weekend alone. Really shocking stuff there. And the fact that the highest remaining seed in this tournament is a 4 seed just speaks on the parity of NCAA hoops. In the age where freshman phenoms and the one and done era has taken over with programs like Kentucky, Duke, and UNC, we're seeing these smaller programs finally getting through and beating these bigger universities. Yes, for the casual fan, it's going to turn some of them off. They maybe not be as excited. But for me, I love a great Cinderella story. I like these smaller conferences getting a chance to compete at the game's highest stakes and at the highest levels. And we have a really good shot to see a first-time national champion. With the exception of UConn, 3 out of the 4 teams haven't even made the national championship game, and that's just really phenomenal to talk about this tournament. So I'd be really excited for UConn just because they played very hard, but still would be ecstatic to see a team like FAU or San Diego State or even the Hurricanes go all the way and win the national championship. The Mavericks have been an utter disappointment. After trading for Kyrie Irving, you'd think they would be contenders in the Western Conference. The pairing of Luka and Kyrie Irving would have been an unstoppable duo. Both can create their own shot, and they can pull up from such deep range. They have a handle, pretty much just be able to mimic a defense however way you want it. The problem was when you're trading for a guy like Kyrie Irving, you have to give up assets, right? So the price was a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith, a really solid wing defender in today's NBA, and that's basically allowed the Mavericks to be one of the worst defensive teams since acquiring Kyrie Irving. It's not to blame Kyrie Irving. He's performed amazingly during his Mavericks stint. Honestly, Luka has underperformed in my opinion. He hasn't been totally available with injuries, and his defense, which has never been his strength, has been particularly bad during this stretch. He's talked about the fun of the game is kind of evaporating, and it's just more frustration times right now. They're at a real shot of missing the play-in tournament entirely. They at one point were hovering around that 4 or 5 seed range, but you can see that they just have no sense of direction. They can't guard anybody. It's really just coming down to whether Kyrie and Luka can just outgun another team. Yeah, they can show up, but it just depends on whether that 3rd or 4th player can solidly contribute. It also comes down to coaching and management. We saw on a nasty exchange with the Golden State Warriors that they had no idea what hoop to defend, and they allowed the Golden State Warriors to get an easy dunk, and they ended up losing by 2 points. They did file for this weird contest or protest of the loss and replayed the remaining seconds of the game. That will probably get swiftly denied because that just is due to the Mavericks' incompetence between head coach Jason Kidd and the team itself. The Mavericks have been a major disappointment, but this also to talk about the defensive lapses. They have some really small players on this team. a majority of their bigs, they are not even taller than 6'10", and they're playing a 4-guard lineup with having guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. guarding small forwards like Kawhi Leonard or Brandon Ingram, for example, and those two individuals are north of 6'8", with Brandon Ingram being about 6'9" and having just a Kevin Durant kind of release from a high point that you just don't see with jump shooters today. So the lack of size is a huge factor for them getting killed on the boards, and just having these bigger, smaller forwards just getting whatever they want based on the difference in size and weight. And if they end up missing the play-in tournament, which I think they have a really good chance of doing so, it could lead to the Mavericks' implosion. With the All-NBA rosters about to be posted by the time the season comes to an end, there's a very good chance that the Celtics would have 2 All-NBA players, which is great for the year, but the thing is now with the contract extensions coming up for both players, it could lead to both players being paid a combined $600 million over the course of 5 years. I think Jason Tatum certainly is a slam dunk for that extension. I would have some questions for Jaylen Brown and paying him potentially 5 years, $300 million. Of course, you can trade Jaylen Brown for a bevy of players and picks. You just can't plug and play a bunch of players and say you can replicate that type of production from Jaylen Brown. So if I was Brad Stevens and the Boston Celtics front office, I would do whatever it takes to keep this roster together, this dynamic duo together, no matter what it takes in terms of the luxury taxes and the extra amount of dollars you're allocating to these 2 players. It's definitely worth it. The Western Conference standings have been shuffling around for about the better course of a month, with the 4 through 11 seeds just being separated by 3.5 games by the time of this recording. It's really hard to predict where these teams are going to end up by the time the season comes to an end. With the Phoenix Suns at the 4 seed right now, they have an interesting couple of games with the Denver Nuggets. Now, the second game against the Nuggets could be favorable for the Suns because the Nuggets actually wouldn't have anything to play for. I assume that they would lock up the West top seed and very well could be resting players at that time. So they have a little bit of a favorable schedule, so they have a good shot to land that 4 seed and have home court advantage for at least a first round matchup. The 5th seed right now are the LA Clippers, and they end up playing the Memphis Grizzlies, the Pelicans, and also the LA Lakers. The problem is for them, they're without Paul George for the remainder of the regular season as he suffered a sprained knee. It looked worse, but thankfully he's going to be okay and could come back for the postseason. But certainly concerning for the LA Clippers. I mean, they have to play the Memphis Grizzlies twice, the LA Lakers, and the New Orleans Pelicans. The Grizzlies are trying to hold off the Sacramento Kings for that 2 seed. So I know that the Grizzlies are trying to do whatever it takes to have home court advantage for at least 2 postseason series. Then the Lakers, they're trying to stay in the play-in tournament, and that same thing goes for the New Orleans Pelicans. So the Clippers don't get a ton of breaks for their last few games of the NBA season. The Golden State Warriors, the defending champs, they end up playing the Denver Nuggets on the road, but they also play the Thunder, the Kings. The Kings, they'll also be playing on the road, and like I said, the Kings are trying to go for that 2 seed, so that is something that they have to play for. The Nuggets certainly have something to play for with the 1 seed and probably putting the finish touches on that, not to mention that the Nuggets are playing at home versus the Golden State Warriors, and we all know how the Golden State Warriors have struggled greatly this year on the road. So I would be highly concerned in that little gauntlet of teams slated for the last 2 games for the Warriors. The Minnesota Timberwolves arguably had the easiest remaining schedule in the NBA. They have matchups with the Brooklyn Nets and the San Antonio Spurs, to name a couple of their nicer matchups. With them adding in Karl-Anthony Towns to the lineup, he's missed a significant portion of this year to a calf strain, but he's back and looking pretty good. And with him being that floor spacer that they desperately need, I mean, he is a stretch 5 in today's NBA, and that's great production from them. Now, Anthony Edwards has certainly taken the lead in the offense, but I see them definitely having some type of shared responsibility as being the 1A and 1B options in the Minnesota Timberwolves lineup. But still, that is a team I think to watch out for, and they could arguably get out of the play-in tournament entirely. The Pelicans, as presently constructed, they're a fun team to watch, and Zion's return could happen. We just don't know. He has had issues with that hamstring for the better part of this year and has re-aggravated or had some setbacks. If he's able to return and be Zion, that is another team to look out for as well. I'm not sure though, based on their schedule right now. They have a lot of matchups against a ton of Western Conference playoff contenders, so maybe just due to the schedule, they'll have some issues finishing up and getting into the postseason. The Lakers looked bad against the Chicago Bulls, and that was the game that LeBron James returned, but they do get the Bulls once again, and they have some matchups against the Timberwolves, the Clippers. They do have 2 games against the Utah Jazz, who are just clinging on to hopes of maybe getting back into the play-in tournament. I think their season is most likely done. But nonetheless, I think the Lakers are also going to be able to make the play-in tournament. I'm going to take a stab in the dark here. These predictions are possibly going to be quite wrong by the time the regular season wraps up, but here goes. I'm going to have the Phoenix Suns at 4, the Minnesota Timberwolves climbing all the way up to 5, and then I'm going to have the Warriors at 6, Clippers at 7, OKC at 8, the LA Lakers at 9, and then the New Orleans Pelicans at 10, which means the Dallas Mavericks are out. So that's my predictions. Like I said, it could be very wrong, but I'd love to see how this shakes out and for what you guys think the Western Conference playoff race could end up being. LeBron James made a sudden return from apparently tearing a tendon in his foot. That injury that he sustained against the Dallas Mavericks towards the end of February possibly had him missing the remainder of the regular season, possibly derailing the Lakers' entire season. He came back. Now, the Lakers did lose in a matchup against the Chicago Bulls, and we saw a lot of taunting and barbs being traded between Patrick Beverley and Lakers fans. Typical Pat Bev, but you love to have him on your team and you hate to play against him because that guy can be an utter nuisance. To talk about LeBron in particular, he sought out 3 different options on his foot. 2 doctors elected for him to get surgery, and the third said there's a way to be treating this without being so invasive and not having a surgery, and he elected to do that, and apparently he's labeling this doctor as the LeBron James of feet. And the doctors also gave him credit for being a remarkably fast healer. And I don't know if that's genetics or what, but remember, LeBron James invests $1 million into his body every year. And this is part of that return on investment. I mean, remember, he's playing year 20 as a 38-year-old man. Has a ton of mileage on those legs of his and the body as a whole, but he's still finding ways to play quite productively. So we'll see what happens with the Lakers, but it's an interesting story to say the least. James Harden had a pathetic performance against the Chicago Bulls in a double OT loss. He had just 5 points on 2 of 14 shooting and was 0 for 6 from deep. And this is really concerning if I'm a Sixers fan. I mean, this Sixers team has been right on the cusp of being this contender and getting out of this whole pretender bubble. Now, with Harden coming over to the Sixers last year, we had some concerns the last 2 years, ever since he's been traded really from Houston. We've seen him be maligned health-wise with the Brooklyn Nets. Now, he's been healthier with the Philadelphia 76ers, but his play has taken a significant dip. In terms of production, he's not the guy that shoots a high volume anymore. He's more of a pass-first type of guy. You'd be happy if he gives you 25 points a game. Right now, he's probably in the 20-point-per-game area. And yeah, I like his assists game. I mean, he had 12 assists against the Bulls, but I need more production shooting-wise out of James Harden. At least get to the line. In that game, he only had 1 free throw attempt, and that's showing signs he's not being aggressive. So for the Sixers, if they're going to be true contenders, Harden has to step up. And when he doesn't step up, this falls on the shoulders of Joel Embiid. And yeah, he's been playing like an MVP this season and probably finish once again second. My thing is that he's going to be missing a few games now with some calf soreness. And once again, Joel Embiid has shown to be brittle and not so reliable health-wise. In his entire career, he has yet to play 70 games and has only played in 80% of his games 1 season. Those things are just a formula for disaster. I mean, yeah, Joel Embiid is a great NBA player, but the best ability is availability. I know I get on Anthony Davis on this all the time. At least Joel Embiid is more available than Anthony Davis has been as of late, but still, Embiid has to be more reliable. And as of now, getting bounced in just the second round yet again is going to be a big red flag on his career, because he's a player that is so talented. And yeah, it comes down to the team as well, but this team has been pretty good. They've missed a golden opportunity to swipe that 2 seed and get home court advantage in what's assumed to be a second round matchup with the Boston Celtics. So they're going to end up playing the Boston Celtics if it comes down to a game 7. Nonetheless, they have to find a way to get out of the second round and make it to the conference finals, because this team is just too talented to fail yet again and flounder in the second round. So that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. For my listeners on Spotify, give this a 5-star review. It makes a massive difference right there. For all those watching on YouTube, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It makes a massive difference in that YouTube algorithm. And take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. All links are in the description. And until next time, stay safe.